Hey everyone, this is Brian. Welcome to week 6 of CSC 143. Congratulations on making it halfway through the quarter. By now you should have finished up your first exam, hope you didn't find it too difficult, and I will have the exam grades out for you sometime early next week. Your Project 2 deadline has also been slightly moved. I've decided to waive the late penalties so that you can actually turn the Project 2 submission in up until Saturday at midnight, instead of the original deadline, which was Wednesday at midnight. That gives you a couple extra days to focus on it and um, not have to worry about rushing due to having to study for the exam. But please do also turn it in by Saturday. I'm not going to accept submissions afterwards. So you get some extra days, but you can't actually be super late. So make sure you do turn it in make sure you do turn it in on time. That way I can get the grades out to you pretty quickly. This week is going to be a pretty chill week. We're not going to think too hard. And we're not actually going to have lecture on Wednesday. We're only going to have lecture today. And today I'm going to talk about career building and how you can take your future computer science degree and maybe the concepts that you're learning today and turn it into a career that makes money and is going to, let you live an exciting life in programming and software engineering and the technology industry. Now, some of you are in this class to get a job in the computer science or software engineering professions. Some of you are just here just to kind of figure out what computer science is and decide whether or not you want to actually pursue it. This lecture is going to be completely optional, so you can technically close this video right now if you don't want to watch it. But I think it'll be especially useful for those of you who are curious about taking your programming skills and applying them professionally. That's something I do. I really enjoy it a lot. And it's something I encourage you to do as well. And I want to be a resource for you to give you good insight into what the process is for your journey from being a student to being a professional software engineer. Now, we do live in some strange times. The pandemic is still ongoing, and on-site, in-person, face-to-face interviews aren't really happening right now. So, while the things I tell you are still going to be 100% true, and I think I still stand by my presentation I'll be giving you, um, there are some considerations that you'll want to think about during this year when it comes to looking out for interviews or trying to meet with recruiters face to face. Chances are that's not going to be something that's available to you. I imagine most career fairs just aren't happening right now because of COVID. So instead, what'll happen is everything is going to be online and virtual. So if you submit applications through LinkedIn or whatever company application portals there are, they'll get back to you, but it'll be entirely virtual. And instead of doing interviews face to face, maybe on a whiteboard, you'll have to do it in front of a webcam with your microphone and with your keyboard. You're going to have to type actual code, and they might expect for that actual code to actually run. So that makes the interviews a little bit more challenging in some ways, where with whiteboarding, you can kind of talk about what your plan is and then write down your plan at a high level, maybe using pseudocode. And if there have to be changes in the future, you can also talk through those changes, but without the expectation necessarily that you write all those things down. This is because whiteboarding is way slower than typing. But now, because interviews are being done virtually and typically on a shared like coder pad or IDE, what's going to happen is the interviewer is going to actually expect you to write code that looks good and is potentially runnable against specific test cases. So I advise you to actually take the same test-driven development strategy that we've been using throughout this class, is to get familiar with writing test cases of your own, write code quickly, but also write code that looks good and tries to minimize its flaws in the small span of time that you do have, and then try to run tests against your code as often as possible. That will give you and your interviewer reassurance that your code is actually valid, and it'll help you drill down and fix issues with the code if there are any. Okay, that's all I've got. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next week. Hey everyone, this is Brian, recording a very special video lecture for CSC 143. On the very first day of class, I told you about how some of the practical tools and ideas that we've been learning would be directly motivated by the same tools and ideas being used in professional software development. As somebody who works in software development full-time, I wanted to use this class as a way to elevate your own career potential and to help you advance your own career portfolio to tell a compelling story for recruiters and companies in the software engineering industry. I know many of you are in this class to land good jobs after graduation, so I hope that this lecture gives you the tools you need to reflect upon your own position as a student and take advantage of the lessons that you learn moving forwards. Let's go ahead and get started. And I'll open with this quick disclaimer that I'm not a recruiter, I'm not a career expert, and I'm not a hiring manager. there are people who specifically fill these roles, whether from companies, recruiters, or whether actually resources at school who are better informed and know more about the current state of affairs. But I have been in your shoes not too long ago. I was a student just a couple years ago. I was an intern not too long ago, and I did several rounds of interviews all over the country a couple years ago as well. So, although I'm not directly integrated into the line of recruiting that you might see at a career fair or online on LinkedIn or something like that, I have gone through these experiences, and I want to make sure that you can reflect upon my experiences and take the lessons I've learned moving forwards in your own professional career. So let's say you want to be a software engineer. Programming for you should be a passion. Problem solving should be a joy and not a chore. When you work on the projects in this class, I hope that you are motivated by the notion of learning and understanding the concepts and ideas that were passed along. Programming is something that you're going to be doing day to day. If you find it frustrating or you don't enjoy the process itself, then perhaps software engineering isn't quite the role for you. But if it's something that you enjoy innately, that you're not doing just to get a good grade, then you should definitely consider doing it professionally. Software engineering today requires a lot of being adaptable and being willing to embrace new concepts and ideas. What's considered hot changes all the time. Back in the day, C++ was the new hot thing. And then Java came along, and that was the new hot thing. And then this thing called Ruby came along. Ruby is I guess maybe Ruby didn't replace Java or C++, but it was another one of those very hyped languages. JavaScript is now the dominant language. AI and machine learning are really, really big now. These new concepts are not just ones that we can predict in advance. It's impossible to tell what's going to be the next big thing. But as somebody with good engineering skills and concepts, you yourself can still carry the lessons that you've learned forward into these other languages and platforms and ideas. Just because you learned about how you can write linked lists in Java doesn't stop you from writing linked lists in any of these other languages. And how you treat something like performance and runtime analysis absolutely applies as well. The third point I want to make here is that you do need to be a people person. There is sort of this stereotype that software engineers are kind of like these basement bros who hang out all on their own, introverted, don't talk to anybody, just spend all day in front of a computer and write code, and don't have to be very social. And to some degree, let's admit it, that's kind of true, right? I mean, I spend a lot of time in front of my computer, I don't really talk to everybody sometimes, and I'll write a bunch of code. But if you're going to work on a big project, whether it be at a small startup or at a big company, you're going to have to interact with others. You're going to have to interact with other engineers to help you solve problems. You're going to have to interact with mentors who can teach you important lessons about practical ideas and broader career prospects. You're going to have to interact with customers to learn what their pain points are and how to solve their problems. You're going to have to be comfortable talking to people. So on one hand, yes, there's this aspect of you doing your own work on your own time, on your own machine. But at the same time, you do need to be a people person. Be nice to people. Be somebody that other people are willing to work with. And when you go for an interview, you want this to be reflected by your by how you treat others and how others perceive you. So, although there is sort of the expectation that you can do your own work, there's also this expectation that you are a good person to work with. The general cycle for you as a student over the next couple of years until you graduate with a bachelor's degree or whatever you're trying to pursue is going from being a student during a semester to being an engineering intern at some company for a couple weeks or months, and then going back to being a student. Your prime directive as a student is to get a summer internship. Depending on when you're watching this video, the summer may be coming up very soon or coming up very much later, but generally the summertime is when companies hire a whole bunch of interns, have them on for 3 months, and give them job offers at the end of the internship if they did well. Once you graduate, ideally you've built yourself up a compelling portfolio of professional experiences that will help you land interviews and offers from bigger and better companies that you want to work for. Now, how do you land that internship? Well, you probably need a data structures course. That tends to be the bare minimum in terms of education. Good thing for you, this is a data structures course, so we've got that covered. Typically, second year students, which is most likely you, have better chances than first year students because you already have some experience in programming. Having experience at some company is better than no experience at no company. It may be tempted to immediately try to land a job at one of these super hype big companies that make a lot of money. Facebook, Google, Twitter, Amazon, Netflix, whatever you name it. But also recognize that, kind of like the top schools in the country, these companies are very, very competitive. There are hundreds, thousands of applicants who apply for these companies every single year, and the majority of them, the vast majority of them, are going to get turned down. So don't get upset if that happens to you. Understand that it's likely not personal. There are just a lot of candidates to go through. So I encourage you to keep an open mind about the places you plan to work at. Just because you've never heard of a company before doesn't mean they're a bad place to work. When you go to these career fairs or when you go browse online for openings at all sorts of companies, be open-minded for the places you can work, or you could work, because chances are those places could give you offers and you could leverage that experience further to then move up in the world in terms of companies and opportunities that you have. This picture on the lower right here is an image taken of what I think is the University of Washington Career Fair. You can see some companies here, like what appears to be Twitter, what appears to be Chase Bank, maybe. If you look around, perhaps some other places like you recognize. And what I want to point out from this picture is if you kind of look for the people in colored shirts, which tend to be the recruiters, like these blue shirt people over here or these purple shirt people over here, is that you're going to see how many more students there are compared to recruiters. So with this image, I want to emphasize to you how much the odds are sort of stacked against you, right? You're trying to win the career lottery here in a way. And if you focus too much on just one company, then it's the equivalent of only buying one lottery ticket. Like, even if you have good credentials, you still may not get in just on the basis of bad luck. However, if you apply to a whole bunch of places, maybe some of the less popular and well-known companies, then your odds are going to be much better, well distributed against all these possible places you could go. So here's a possible timeline of your life as a student all the way to you graduating and then moving on to full-time work. Perhaps you're in data structures right now. You could go get a summer internship at a smallish company, maybe one that's not super hyped up, one doesn't have a ton of applicants, but one that can still give you good experience. Next year, maybe you take a computer architecture course. You can leverage the experience that you had at your first company onto your second company and move up to a different company, or you could actually go back to your original company and work there again for another summer. Then 1 year later, you're taking different electives or more specific courses like algorithms or AI. Chances are now you have enough experience to land yourself a role at a larger company, one of these more popular ones, Facebook, Apple, Amazon's. And then after you graduate, year 4, maybe you have a bachelor's degree, maybe you're going on to graduate school. This is your chance to combine all that experience that you have to reflect upon the most important lessons and projects that you've learned and worked on to have a very compelling portfolio to show any of the companies that you've worked on so far or any company that you would like to work at to land a full-time role with the experiences that you have. The list of companies I have on the right side here are kind of reflective of the journey I almost had when I was a student at the University of Texas and eventually graduated with my master's degree. The first company I worked for was called Spiceworks. They were kind of a smallish IT company based in Austin. The next company I worked for was called Retail Me Not, maybe slightly bigger. Maybe you've actually heard about them before. They're an online couponing firm. And I used my experiences from those first two companies to finally land a job at Microsoft, which I now work for professionally full-time. Summer recruiting season, that is for summer internships, is around September through January. That being said, the earlier you get your foot in the door and you start to get your name down in different places, the better that is. Oftentimes, a lot of companies will sort of lock in their intern selection before the year of the summer where the interns arrive. So if you can kind of get in your applications during winter break or winter quarter, then you're probably in a good spot. And when I say winter quarter, I mean the last couple months of the winter, not maybe the springtime in terms of the calendar year. I mean winter calendar time. Ways you can meet recruiters: career fairs are a good place. You can talk face to face with people. Depending on when you're watching this may not be possible, but certainly something to watch out for. The University of Washington Career Fair, I believe, is actually open to all students, not just UW students, so make sure to go look at that. There's also other opportunities at other colleges as well, so keep an eye out for opportunities abound, and again, keep an open mind about the companies that you could be working for. The online opportunities are generally a little bit more competitive because you can't talk to people in person, so you can't get guaranteed face-to-face time, but it's still a good source of where companies will get resumes and applications. A lot of companies will have direct portals on their own website where you can apply online. You can also try to reach out to recruiters directly through LinkedIn, where most companies will have some sort of representation, where there's a way to apply on that platform and not just go through whatever portal that they have on their own website. This fourth option here called referrals, I have listed, but are maybe not something that you want to rely on too much. It's true that somebody already working on a company that you want to work for can help your chances in terms of landing an interview or landing a job, but it's not a guarantee. So it's something that you should take advantage of if you have connections, but I wouldn't be too worried if you don't have those connections, or I wouldn't be too dependent on having those connections do the heavy lifting for you. You should be still trying to build your own compelling portfolio to stand out among other applicants, even if you don't have a referral. Now, whether you're meeting with a recruiter in person or you're applying online, we have this big question of how do you stand out amongst all the other candidates? How can you look good to a prospective employer? If the resume that you hand in represents your qualifications, then among this funnel of reaching the interview stage and finally reaching the offer stage, how are you going to get down to the bottom of this funnel and make sure that you stand out the most among all the other applicants involved? There's a couple of standard things we can look at when it comes to your own personal portfolio. Having a strong educational background certainly helps. Going to a good school, taking the relevant classes, having a good GPA, all those things make for a good foundation. I put a little star next to GPA there because for computer science roles, it tends to not matter as much. The industry doesn't value academia perhaps not as much as other industries. But that being said, having a good GPA is still going to be something that will benefit you. What tends to be the rule of thumb is as long as you have a 3.0 or higher, then it's something they should list on your resume. And we'll talk about this pretty soon. On top of your academic background, you also want to have an interesting portfolio of things that you do on your own time, professionally or personally. This can include things like work experience, personal projects, extracurricular involvement, and leadership. Then finally, you should also list out your relevant skills. What things matter for the job you're applying for? Maybe the job specifically calls out programming languages like Java or specific tools like Git. If you can demonstrate that you have these skills already, then you might be a better fit than other candidates who don't. Your resume is ultimately going to represent you when a recruiter filters through the set of candidates that they've received. In fact, your resume is often the only thing recruiters will know about you, so it has to be perfect. Let me emphasize what it means by being perfect. I mean, it has to be perfect. There will be recruiters who will throw out resumes for very simple typos or errors in the formatting of the document. If it doesn't look professional, if it doesn't look perfect, then immediately you've put yourself at a disadvantage against all the other resumes that are. So let me repeat that. Your resume is often the only thing recruiters know about you. It must be perfect. The things you might want to put on a resume include the topics we've discussed already, your educational background, your technical skills, the projects you've worked on, your professional experiences, and maybe your extracurricular involvement. Now, how about the process of actually creating a resume from scratch? Honestly, start with Microsoft Word. I'm not trying to shill here, just pointing out that Word actually has a whole bunch of resume templates built in that you can access for free. There's also a bunch of whole other templates online that you can find at different career websites, including this one that I've linked here, which points to the University of Texas career building page. You can also build it on your own time. Here is a preview of the resume template that's on that University of Texas link. It's got the standard fare categories like education, experience, projects, and so forth that we just talked about. Generally, the design doesn't matter that much. It doesn't have to look too fancy. It doesn't have to look something that visually appeals or stands out. It just has to look professional and something that enumerates all your skills and relevant experience in a clean, well-formatted way. At the end of the day, all resumes are going to look about the same, especially the ones in computer science, because all of us are going to have kind of similar categories of backgrounds and knowledge that we're passing along. So again, don't try to stand out too much. In fact, it might be kind of distracting if you put on some too much flourish and design in your resume. Just keep it simple, keep it important, and make sure that you stay focused in the terms of content that you put on there. Now let's break down the categories one by one. I've gone ahead and attached a sample resume filled out to the notes of this lecture, where you can go over how I've managed to fill in the body of many of those fields that you'll see on that University of Texas resume template. You don't have to use that template, but it does have everything you need, so it's one that I do like to suggest. Again, you're always welcome to make your own. You can use any of the templates built into Word. You can use any template really that you find online, but it should have all the essentials here. Start out with your name, maybe your address. That's entirely optional. I don't think it's really necessary. Ways to contact you, including your phone number and your email address, and maybe a link to your GitHub or your LinkedIn. And typically, the opening section that we put on here for recent grads is education, where you talk about your academic experiences. Write down things like the schools you've attended, the dates in which you attended them, relevant coursework if it applies. As you take more advanced courses over time, you're probably going to end up filtering out some of these earlier courses like Intro to Computer Programming, because everyone's expected to have that skill. It's not going to make you stand out anymore. But if you're applying for maybe an AI specific gig, then perhaps you want to have something like an artificial intelligence course on your coursework list. Should you show your GPA? Rule of thumb is yes, you should if it's above 3.0. If it's not, you might get asked why it's not here. And I think you should have a good answer prepared for that. A lot of the time, recruiters will use educational background and dedication to schoolwork as a sort of tiebreaker among candidates who have otherwise similar experiences. And you don't want poor performance in school to reflect poorly on your potential performance at a career. So you do want to keep your grades up, but it's not devastating if your grades aren't perfect. That's okay. Nobody's perfect. Do try to keep your grades intact and have good reasons perhaps for justifying them and making up for bad grades as necessary throughout the rest of your resume. The next bit is perhaps a bit harder to fill out if you're just starting to work professionally, which is this experience section. In the experience section, you're going to list out the places that you've worked, the dates that you worked, and the things that you did at those places. The two examples I here are in the document, in the presentation, are kind of those that I just made up. We've got ABC Software, located in Bellevue, Washington, where this person was a software reliability engineering intern. We talk about how they developed a brand new online storefront that serves customers daily. They've implemented modern Java engineering practices. Okay, so here we have clear indication of where they worked, what they did, and the accomplishments that they had while they were on the job. In this second example for XYZ Hardware, located in Redmond, Washington, where this person was a junior hardware engineer, I said some things that were quite a bit simpler. They built IoT devices for smart home applications. They worked with the Arduino SDK for debugging and fixing bugs. I want you to notice the contrast between these two experience blocks. The first one tells a bit of a story. It describes how this person was involved with the processes and products that the company delivered. In this sense, the engineering intern has improved the product and processes involved at the company. They've implemented team-wide modern Java engineering practices. With these sort of descriptions that you put on the experience section, you want to be able to tell an interesting story, a compelling story. You want to be able to demonstrate that while you were at this company, you made a meaningful impact. In the second example here, the story that's being told is a lot less interesting. The junior hardware engineer has built IoT devices. Cool. They worked with the Arduino 1.2.3 SDK and fixed bugs using the debugger. Cool. I mean, these points are technically true, but they don't tell an interesting story. Anybody can say that they worked with Java 11, right? And reading this kind of simple bullet point that just states the things that you did may not be so meaningful compared to the impact that you made. So when it comes to filling out this section, you do want to be descriptive, keep it short, but be descriptive, and make it so that when somebody reads this, they immediately see that you have made an influence on the company and not just sat around and did simple generic things. Is it kind of professional bullshitting? Yeah, sort of. And this is one of those things where selling yourself is kind of like selling anything to other people. I guess one example of this in real life is going to a car dealership. Car dealerships are very good at selling their cars. Their salespeople are very good at coming up with ways to describe how their cars are amazing, every other dealership's cars are bad, why all these features are really important to you, and why you'll love it. In a similar way, when you write out your resume in your experience section, you should talk about why this company will love you, why you've demonstrated your experiences and you've demonstrated your impact in the past, and why you have great potential to make that same kind of excellent impact at the company you plan to work for. If you just read a car spec sheet, it may not be super interesting to see that, oh, the car has air conditioning, oh, the car has satellite radio, or whatever. However, maybe it's a lot more interesting if you're test driving this car on a hot day and you have air conditioning turned on and it feels great, and you're listening to music over satellite radio, and that makes it an entertaining ride. So it's the difference, again, between being able to tell a good story versus being able to just list out things that you did. You want to be able to tell a good story with the things that you list out. Keywords and buzzwords are fine. You'll see some of them in these descriptions like Java Spring, React, Jenkins, JUnit. Don't overdo it though. You should try to land on the important keywords that are actually relevant to the things that you've done, but don't also make it look like you're just trying to play keyword bingo to try to pick up on whatever the hottest trends are, and it kind of looks a little fake if you do that. So list out the keywords that you think are relevant, list out the tools and practical names of things that you think are relevant, but don't try to make it your primary descriptive text. This next section is a project section that I'd like you to include, especially if you don't have all that much professional experience yet. And what projects can do for you, personal projects that is that they can substitute professional experience for personal experience. Projects should be interesting, but they don't have to be novel. I think a lot of students will kind of fall into this trap of believing that their projects aren't worth listing because maybe other students have done them before, or this isn't some particularly new invention, or it's not patentable, or they haven't made $1 million off of it, and so forth. That's fine, whatever. Forget about coming up with the next Uber and the next Airbnb. Just come up with interesting projects, ideas that you've done in your own time that demonstrate to whoever's reading these documents, whoever's reading your resume, that you go out of your way to learn new things. And you're willing to take risks and pursue ideas that challenge you outside of what you might just see in your classes. Some examples that I've got listed here, storefront simulator, a fully functional Java storefront interface for selling goods, tracking inventory, and computing transactions, extended work from CSC 143 Project 1 to include a command line interface and saving state to disk. This is one of those examples of how you could potentially extend a class project to be more meaningful. Maybe you took along that little world simulator that I offered you in the first project and built out a cool little application to run your own little world with extended features. The second one, Super To-Do List, a Java to-do list manager with deadline alerts and automatic task prioritization. It's got a desktop and mobile Android application kept in sync using the Google Firebase Java API. Again, here we see a project that is not, I guess, innovative, right? There are millions of to-do lists in the world. To-do list application tends to be like the hello world of app development. But from reading this, it demonstrates that whoever wrote this down has gone out of their way to learn new technologies like writing mobile Java applications or using the Google Firebase API, and then having the resourcefulness to link all these things together to come up with new features that they think are compelling and interesting, and to do it on their own without, I guess, leveraging already existing to-do lists to come up with their feature set. So what I want you to take away from this is that you can use kind of rudimentary ideas, maybe they're boring ideas, and extend them in meaningful ways that adapt interesting technologies that are relevant to the things that you've learned in class, as well as new and interesting to you personally. Find something cool, learn about it. Maybe it's brand new, maybe it's challenging, maybe it's risky, maybe it's uncomfortable, and that's okay. Having a variety of experiences are going to help you better adapt to whatever experiences that you have professionally. Some extra sections that I have listed out. Activities and leadership, honors and awards. Extracurriculars are icing on the cake. If you can participate in community events like hackathons or volunteering, this is a great way to show initiative beyond whatever projects and professional experience and academic experience that you've already listed. Also put down a skills section, talk about how you experience with certain things and familiar with other things. If you write something down here, be prepared to back it up. If you say that you are experienced at Java, then an engineer might come along and ask you about Java, and you should be ready to answer Java questions. Here, I would recommend you stay humble. If you write down your experience or familiar with something, be upfront and honest and say when you don't know something. Don't try to come up with BS, because a knowledgeable engineer will see right through you. So it's okay to say that you have worked with certain things, and you should say that, but also recognize when your knowledge gap, or when your knowledge ends and you have knowledge gaps, and make sure to mention them whenever you're questioned about the technologies that you've got listed here. A couple of extra pro tips I've got written down. Keep a resume to 1 page max. That tends to be a rule of thumb for entry-level computer science roles, especially those of you who don't have graduate level experience. This kind of forces you to keep your resume compact and focused and relevant. And most companies will kind of ignore supplemental pages. I know some recruiters that will just kind of throw out the second page or third page or n number of pages that you've tacked on in addition to your front page. Just make 1 page, have everything that's relevant. If you have too much content, cut down on the older content or the content that doesn't matter as much anymore. You don't have to put everything on here, but you should put down the things that well fit the job descriptions you're applying for. Second point, no typos. Professionalism counts. It's got to be perfect. I don't want to see a single typo in your resume if I ever have a chance to look at it. Having any mistake is enough to get your resume thrown out. It's a really bad sign, right? It indicates that if you're not willing to put in the effort to make your own representation of yourself be perfect, then you're probably not going to put in the same willingness to do a perfect job or really good job at the company you're going to go work for. You have unlimited time to prepare your resume, but you only have an hour or 30 minutes to do the interview. So take the time, make it perfect, don't have typos. More is better, don't overdo it. If you can fill out the page, great. If you can't fill out the page, maybe thinking about adopting some more projects or learning about new technologies and gaining new experiences. But white space is good, right? You don't want to overload the content on your front page. You don't want to make it too compact and hard to read, but you also don't want to make it seem sparse. Be proactive with recruiters. If you ever run into them in person, get a business card or get an email contact so you can follow up with them. Don't be afraid to check in with them. Email them out of the blue, call them out of the blue. You might get ghosted, that's fine, it's a natural occurrence, but it doesn't really hurt to reach out. Look out for special recruiting events if possible. Sometimes there will be something like company office hours or special company brown bags or tech talks. And these are important opportunities for you to discuss directly with engineers what kind of opportunities would be available for work. Be comfortable with rejection. No company is the company. I talked to you about how it's very easy to get enamored with these big popular companies like Facebook or Netflix or Amazon or Apple or something like that. At the same time, these companies get thousands and thousands of applicants, and they think much less about you than you might think about them. So be comfortable with rejection. It's okay if you don't get in on the first try. It's okay if you don't get in on the third try. Just keep your eyes open for opportunities and take the ones that you can get and look forward to the ones that you might be able to qualify for in your future. Expect to be ghosted often, as recruiters technically aren't obligated to let you know that you've been turned down. It's always okay to reach out to a recruiter to see what your status of your application is, but if you get ignored and you don't get a response after something like a week, then you can more or less assume that you were declined the position. Don't get too frustrated when this happens. Again, cast a wide net. Be willing to take on opportunities that may not be necessarily super exciting at first, but can give you the necessary experience to build upon that you can eventually leverage in your future. Now let's go over the interviewing stage. The process for most companies first starts out with an initial phone screening. This is just a couple of behavioral questions to make sure that you're not crazy, that you have good intent, and that you definitely have a desire to go work with the company that you applied for. Once you pass that, expect something like a phone or on-campus technical interview, where an engineer will come out, talk to you 30 minutes to an hour, and have you solve some technical programming challenge, either via a whiteboard if it's done in person, or through live coding on a platform like Google Docs, where you can share a screen with somebody. This problem tends to be not terribly difficult because it's one that you do have to solve in a limited span of time. As with all interviewing that's technical, you want to be open-minded with what your interviewer is telling you and try to encourage them to believe that you are somebody that's good to work with. Once you pass this interview, you should make it to an on-site interview where you'll go do several rounds of something that's a bit more challenging. If this interview takes place at a different location that's further than something like a short drive, then you should expect that the company is going to pay for the travel and commute and meals and anything else involved in the interviewing process. For large companies, you can expect several back-to-back interviews of 1-hour whiteboarding, maybe including a lunch break, where this whole time you're essentially being evaluated about your performance as not just somebody who's technically capable, but somebody who might be working with them in the future. For the technical interviews, you can expect to see one difficult, so to speak, technical problem. I've got a couple ones that I can just think off the top of my head here. Reverse a singly linked list, implement a queue using 2 stacks, merge 2 sorted lists in a single sorted order, print a tree in row order like breadth first search order, find the subrange in an array of integers that has the greatest sum, etc., etc. These 2 books here, Cracking the Coding Interview, they're actually the same book. The only difference is the one on the left is the 6th edition and the one on the right is the 5th edition. These books contain several hundreds of these kinds of technical standalone programming problems, as well as solutions and guidance for how to solve them. I really recommend you check out Cracking the Coding Interview. It's not too expensive. You can find it online. You can also find it online if you search around, but I won't give you direct links to that. In any case, they're really valuable resources for you to get good practice on the types of challenges that you'll be presented when you go through an interview. This tends to be the latest trend of what happens in technical interviews, which is to ask this one difficult technical problem. And it's important that you can have a wide variety of experiences to help you address whatever problems and challenges that are presented to you. If you're doing it in person, expect to only have access to a whiteboard and no other resources. You won't have Google available to you. You won't be able to read Stack Overflow questions. You should be able to essentially write pseudocode on the spot. If you can write actual code, great. You're not really expected to have the fine details of syntax written down, but you should be able to demonstrate how you would implement this in a given programming language of your choice. Typically, they don't obligate that you pick a specific programming language. I think the proper thing to do is to pick the language that best suits the problem. But once you decide to go down a particular path, make sure that the things you are writing down make sense. At the very beginning of class, I told you about how this class is not going to feature cookie cutter problem solutions. Similarly, in technical interviews, don't expect to just write down a bunch of loops and have the interviewer be impressed. You definitely want to think about the problem that you're solving, think about the context of the problem and how it relates to the problems that you solved in your past in your own experience, and then talk about the solution with the interviewer as you go over it. Again, you won't have access to an IDE, you won't have access to test cases, you won't have access to documentation. So as a way of preparing on your own time, you could try these challenges on your own with just pen and paper and not having access to these external resources that you would typically get if you were doing a project as course, for example. Practice, practice, practice. This is the best way to prepare, is just to go over these problems on your own without access to external resources. One way to enforce this is to have a friend do the interviewing for you. Have a friend read through the problem, have them explain it to you, and then have them validate your solution without offering you additional help. There's a lot of online platforms that will do this on your behalf as well, including LeetCode, HackerRank, and CareerCup, where they'll present problems to you, you'll be given sample inputs and sample outputs, and you'll be tasked with solving that problem, perhaps in an online IDE form, where you're actually required to write code down. The better you can solve these problems without getting external help, the better off you'll be inside the in-person whiteboarding context. When you actually show up in person at the company that's interviewing you, bring questions. Learn and do research about the company before you actually arrive, so that you can give off the appearance of having a vested interest in wanting to work there. As I mentioned before, be a people person, be nice to the people that you're talking to, be friendly, not sassy, be humble, and acknowledge when you don't know things, such that the interviewer could potentially offer you help and guidance. And understand that when you make mistakes, you should express a willingness and confidence to learn from those mistakes, not try to overcome them by pretending that you know what you're doing and giving off a semblance of overconfidence. At the end of the interview, be thankful and open-minded. Again, you may not land this position, but you can still be nice to the people that gave you this chance. And you should always be appreciative regardless of how things turn out for you. Be open-minded in the sense that this may not be the number one company you're shooting for, but this could still be a valuable chance for you to gain experience that you can then leverage in your future. Let's go a little bit more over what I mean by doing your research about a company. Knowing is half the battle. Glassdoor.com is an excellent resource for job reviews and insights. On Glassdoor here, on this image on the right, I've searched up Microsoft as a company, and here in Glassdoor you can see all sorts of things about how other candidates have gone through the Microsoft process. You can read about the kinds of interviews that they've had, the kind of difficulty, the sort of questions that people have gotten, their experiences, and how they managed to land the interview. You can then read more about what sort of job positions there are and what kind of salaries people make. So then you can compare this position at this company against other companies that you can find on Glassdoor. Now let's talk about you landing the offer. This is somebody who seems to be pretty excited about what they're reading on their screen, which might be you when a company has accepted you. Offers are going to come with some standard information, compensation and benefits, work location, work dates, and other bonuses that may be relevant to you if you're starting at full-time. This can include things like a signing bonus, a starting bonus, and a stock bonus. You should expect to see all of these things upfront to you inside an offer letter. This is perhaps the best confirmation that you are getting what a recruiter is telling you about. And it's important that you be careful to note each of these details. Things like work location and work dates can influence how much value you're actually getting out of the offer. If a place is more expensive to live at, then maybe the higher salary that they're offering you should be able to offset that. If a company is offering you signing bonuses or stock bonuses, then maybe think about the future of the company and whether or not you'd be likely to stay there long term versus just take the short-term offer and accept the first round of stocks that will vest or whatever. Now, your prime directive when you get this offer is to always negotiate compensation. Always, always try and negotiate. Even if it's not immediately obvious that you can negotiate, you should ask for more. Always negotiate compensation. I want to make that really clear. Don't be shy. Asking for more is never going to hurt you. You're not going to get rejected for trying, unless you become a mean person, right? Be a people person. Again, be thankful of the offer that you receive. Be appreciative. Keep an open mind about this opportunity. But don't be afraid to ask for more, because they're not going to say no all of a sudden and reject you outright. Asking for more is not going to suddenly invalidate the existing offer that you do have. Know your worth. Leverage competing offers against each other. If you have multiple offers, talk about how one offer is offering more than another offer. Also, check Glassdoor for what the expected salary range is for the position that you've applied for, and make sure that you're getting the same pay as others who are in the same position. Stay humble, be thankful and polite. The recruiter is not your enemy here. Ultimately, you want to convince the recruiter to talk to HR to give you a better offer and you want to prove to your recruiter that you are a valuable candidate among all the other candidates there. Your recruiter will work for you or will work with you to make sure that you have the best offer available and are most likely to join up on the company. Remember that the recruiter's job is to convince you to come work for them. So in a way, you asking for more is one way of telling your recruiter that you may be more valuable and that you're more convinced to go work for the company if they can leverage more payment onto your side. As an example of what a negotiation might sound like, let's go over a sample phone call. Now, if this was something that we'd go over in class, I'd have some of you try and reenact this, but I'll just go ahead and go through it as a reflection of my own negotiation experiences. Recruiter says, "Hi, we'd like to offer you the position of software engineering intern at XYZ Corp." You say, "Wow, thanks. That's very exciting. Tell me more." Recruiter says, "Sure, the offer is for 3 months starting in July. You'll be working in Seattle. You'll be compensated $21 an hour." You say, "Well, that's great. This is excellent news. Thank you. Is the offer negotiable?" Recruiter says, "It is, but we're limited in what we can change. What did you have in mind?" You say, "Well, the cost of living in Seattle is quite a bit higher. I also have a competing offer from ABC Corp. Can you beat them at, say, $26 an hour?" Recruiter says, "We can't get that close, but we may be able to confirm $24 an hour. How does that sound?" That sounds great. Always negotiate compensation. This is typically how one of those conversations will go. Yes, there will always be some pushback from the company. Of course, they want to save money and you want to earn money, but it's not something that should be difficult for you to ask for. It's a process that is very much expected of candidates, and if you don't try to negotiate, then chances are you're leaving money on the table. Again, they're not going to suddenly invalidate your offer if you ask for more. The only way to suddenly lose the offer is if you're mean and you're not appreciative. But again, be a people person, appreciate the fact that you've gotten an offer from them. This is a valuable opportunity for you and it's a valuable opportunity for them. And try to make the most of it as much as possible with the leverage that you can gain from your other offers, as well as the knowledge that you have about how much this position is worth. Now, let's say you're lucky and you have several offers. You're like this guy over here, who's stressed out because there's so many people who want to sign things, who want your signature. When deciding between companies, think about the various factors that each company has in terms of what it's like to work there. Is a company big or small? How are the team sizes relative to other companies and the size of each product? What's the culture of the company like? Do they move fast and break things? That used to be Facebook's motto. Is it challenging and yet rewarding? Is it high risk in that sense, where you're expected to take on new challenges every day? What's the location like? What's the cost of living? What's the lifestyle? What are the people who live next door going to be like? Location can be a very important factor when it comes to what you do outside of work and the opportunities that you have available. How about the money? Does it pay competitively? How about the stocks? Do you think the company is going to grow well? And your future. Can you advance your career here? Do you think you'll stay there for several years? Do you think they'll stay there for 1 year? What's the median turnaround time? What's the median turnover for the engineers at the company that are already there? Consider reaching out to existing employees for insights on this. On LinkedIn, you're bound to find different employees who have worked there currently or have worked there in the past, and you can reach out to them, and I'm sure they would be happy to give you the insight as to why they're staying or why they've left, and let you understand better what it's like to work there. Okay, that makes the end of my presentation. I hope this video has given you some insight into the process of applying for, interviewing with, and landing good software engineering positions at tech companies. I encourage you to work on side projects on your own to supplement your own professional experiences and develop a good career profile that you can then pass on to recruiters to tell a good story about how you would be a great candidate. As your instructor, I will be here for you as your career expert, where I can review your resumes or I can point you towards resources to prepare for interviews, as well as perhaps offer you advice when you receive offers. Feel free to reach out to me over email or even over LinkedIn to get some more insight into this process. That's all I have for today. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.